At my mother-in-law's command, my husband's family took a vote. With a show of hands, I was officially banished. There were tears, but not from me. I was too shocked, too humiliated to cry. But exactly 1 week later, a single letter landed on their doorstep. They had no idea that their little vote had just kicked off a chain reaction that would shatter their family. And the key to it all was inside that envelope. My mother-in-law, Carol, had it out for me from the start. It wasn't a whirlwind, it was a slow, grinding erosion that began the day my husband, Mark, introduced us. Her smile was a perfect polished veneer, but her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan, and I just knew. From that moment on, I was a project, a problem she needed to solve. At first, it was small things, backhanded compliments designed to make me second-guess myself. "That's a very interesting dress, dear. So brave of you." Or she'd helpfully rearrange our living room when she visited, sighing about the clutter. She had this way of making her intrusions feel like favors, which made my objections feel like ingratitude. Mark, bless his heart, was stuck in the middle. He'd grown up with her iron will, so to him, her behavior was just mom being mom. He'd say things like, "She doesn't mean it that way," or "She's from a different generation." He loved me, and he loved his mother, and he just couldn't see that she was forcing him to choose, one tiny cut at a time. Things got worse after our wedding. It was like our marriage vows were a declaration of war. Suddenly, my cooking was never right. My career was unstable. When we bought our first house, she told everyone we'd overpaid and that the neighborhood was going downhill. Every time I had a win, she'd downplay it. Every time I struggled, she blew it up into some catastrophic failure. She was an expert at planting seeds of doubt, not just in Mark's mind, but with his entire family. His aunts, uncles, and cousins only heard her carefully edited version of my life. I was either lazy or too ambitious, too quiet or too loud. I couldn't do anything right. The worst part was the isolation. At family gatherings, she would steer conversations to topics I couldn't possibly join, like obscure family history or inside jokes from before I was around, all while giving me a look that said, "See? You don't belong." Mark would try to pull me in, but the undertow of her influence was just too strong. She was the sun, and the rest of the family were planets held in her orbit, and I was just some asteroid threatening her perfect little solar system. The whole thing finally blew up on a Sunday. Carol had called a family meeting. She didn't give an agenda, but the fake gravity in her voice when she spoke to Mark gave me a knot in my stomach. I knew, somehow, this was about me. We walked into a living room so thick with tension you could feel it. Carol was sitting in her armchair like a queen holding court. Mark's father, a quiet man who'd long ago given up, just stared at the floor. Aunts, uncles, and two of Mark's cousins were scattered on the sofas, looking both uncomfortable and grimly determined. Carol let the silence hang for a moment before she started. She talked about family unity, tradition, and protecting what was theirs. She didn't use my name at first, just referred to me as a disruptive influence and an outsider who didn't respect their ways. She listed my crimes, each one a twisted version of reality. A time I'd missed dinner for a work emergency became a deliberate snub. A political opinion I'd once shared was spun into an attack on their values. Then, she looked right at me. "We feel," she said, using "we" like a weapon, "that your presence is no longer beneficial to this family. It causes friction. It causes pain." Mark shot up from his seat. "Mom, this is insane. You can't be serious." "I am perfectly serious," she said, her voice turning to ice. "We are a family, and we have a right to protect our peace. So we're going to vote. All those in favor of asking her to no longer attend family functions, to be, for all intents and purposes, removed from this circle. Raise your hand." My heart just stopped. This couldn't be real. I looked at Mark, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Then, slowly, a hand went up. One of his aunts, then an uncle, then his cousin. One by one, their hands went up. Some wouldn't look at me. Others stared with the same coldness as Carol. Mark's father didn't raise his hand, but he didn't protest either. His silence was its own vote. It was nearly unanimous. Mark was shouting, his voice cracking with rage, but I could barely hear him. A wave of cold shock washed over me, so deep that there was no room for tears. It was a humiliation so total, so absolute, that my brain couldn't really process it. To be judged and formally cast out by people who were supposed to be my family? It was a wound deeper than anything I'd ever known. The drive home was silent. What was there to say? The next week was a blur. Mark was furious, ignoring his mother's calls, but the silence from everyone else was deafening. It was like they had erased me. And then, exactly 1 week after the vote, a letter arrived. A crisp, cream-colored envelope addressed to Mark's parents. It had been delivered to our house by mistake. Maybe the mailman was new? Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a mistake at all. Mark just stared at the envelope. The return address was a law firm downtown. He recognized the name from when his grandfather's estate was handled years ago. He drove over to his parents' house with the letter on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. I stayed home. This was their drama. I was, after all, banished. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by this strange, quiet awe. "You are not going to believe this," he said. He told me he'd walked in and just handed the letter to his mother. Carol, probably assuming it was nothing important, opened it with a sigh. But as she read, the color drained from her face. The letter was from the trustee of his grandfather's will. Apparently, Mark's grandfather, a shrewd and observant man, had seen his wife's manipulative streak long before anyone else. He loved his family, but he wasn't blind. So, he had placed a very specific, very powerful clause deep within his family trust. The clause stated that the huge inheritance for his children and grandchildren was dependent on the family remaining a cohesive, welcoming unit. It spelled out that if any family member, through a vote, formal declaration, or concerted campaign of exclusion, tried to banish the legal spouse of a direct descendant, the clause would be triggered. And the consequence? The inheritance of every single person who took part in the shunning would be null and void. Their shares would be immediately forfeited. And where would all that money go? Every last cent would be redirected into a new trust for the sole benefit of the wronged couple. In this case, Mark and me. The letter was a formal inquiry. The lawyer had been anonymously informed of a family vote and was legally obligated to investigate. He politely asked them to confirm or deny that this happened and to provide the names of everyone who voted yes. Carol was speechless. She just looked from the letter to her husband and back again, as if willing it to be a mistake. But it wasn't. There was only the stark, brilliant reality of her late husband's foresight. That's when all hell broke loose. The frantic phone calls started almost immediately. Panicked apologies poured in from the same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had so coldly raised their hands a week ago. They weren't sorry for hurting me. They were terrified of going broke. They begged Mark to tell the lawyer it was just a misunderstanding, a heated discussion that got out of hand. But it was too late. Mark, with a calm he hadn't felt in years, told them he would be telling the lawyer the complete and honest truth. He would list every single person who raised their hand. The fallout was catastrophic for them. Carol's power, built on control and the influence of her husband's legacy, crumbled overnight. The woman who had orchestrated my banishment had, in one arrogant move, disinherited herself and almost the entire family. They were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own cruelty. In the end, we didn't take the money. After talking with the lawyer, Mark instructed him to donate the entire forfeited inheritance to a charity his grandfather had always loved. It was never about the money for us. It was about the principle. The silence that came after was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of being excluded. It was the clean, quiet peace that comes when you finally draw a line in the sand. We started our own traditions. We built a life on our own terms, based on respect, free from the shadow of Carol's judgment. I didn't have to fight for my place anymore, because we had built our own. The whole thing taught me a painful but powerful lesson. You can't force people to value you. Your self-worth isn't something that can be voted on by a committee in a living room. It's a quiet truth you carry inside yourself. They thought their vote could break me, but all it did was reveal the rot in their own foundation. And in the most unexpected way possible, it set me free. They tried to banish me, but they only ended up banishing themselves from my life. And I have never been more at peace. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated and painful. Have you ever had to deal with a difficult family situation or set a hard boundary? Share your story in the comments below. I try to read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. It really helps. Thank you for listening.